Hi there, it's Ian here, and you're watching Grumpy Opinions, the show where I'm going to tell you all about what I think of films, TV shows, games, and life in general. Let's get on with the show. Stars Outlander is a show all about Claire Beecham, the time-travelling 1940s nurse who's been separated from her home and husband and trapped for weeks in 1740s Scotland. Will she escape from her Highlander captors? Is she any better off in the hands of the English Redcoats? Will she be able to get back to 1945 at all? And will she ever manage to get it on with local hunk, Jamie McTavish? The Garrison Commander is episode 6 of Outlander and picks up from the final second of episode 5's cliffhanger ending. To the surprise of no one at all, Claire doesn't actually drop Dougal in it, but she still has to go off to meet the local Garrison Commander and all his mates, who are staying at a local tavern they've annexed away from the people. Now, they're a bunch of slightly obvious racist English toffs who welcome Claire into their midst, but act kind of the arse towards Dougal. And then it all gets a wee bit heated, but Claire manages to cleverly defuse the situation, and then gets all pally with these Englishmen, who seem more than happy to just send her off to Inverness with the same wee English officer from the last episode. And he seems to think he's in there with a shot. Good on you, lad. It all seems just a little bit too good to be true, and Claire's hopes are suddenly dashed when Black Jack Randall bursts in and recognises her. And then he spars with her a little bit verbally, and the commander a wee bit, because he's that kind of guy, you know. He likes to make mockery of his betters, especially when he knows that he's a lot cleverer than they are anyway. A few of the things he says make the officers a little bit more wary of Claire, and after a little bit more of his egging her on, she ends up going and landing herself right in it by giving an impassioned wee speech about the poor Scots only wanting freedom. Bad move, Claire. Luckily, before Claire manages to put her foot in it anymore, a wounded man gets brought in from some kind of skirmish nearby, and she legs it downstairs to help hack his arm off. And by the time she's done, all of the new officer mates have gone off chasing these Highlander rebels, and she's left alone with Black Jack Randall. Most of the rest of the episode is spent with the pair of them playing off each other like a little play. It's really, really interesting in the grand tradition of TV interrogation episodes that we've had on Star Trek and Babylon 5 and programs like that. Now, Jack uses his charm, his threats, his artistry, and a little bit of psychology to try and get his information out of Claire. And then it all goes back into an extended bit of backstory, literally, because it's a story all about how Jamie got his scarred back. Now that's when the show gets to go all big castles and outdoors again, with muscular rippling chests and scarred prosthetic backs and little bits of fake blood gouting all over the place. And to be honest, it's really some of it quite horrible, especially when the little bits of back and skin are peeling off Jamie and it just looks absolutely abhorrent, but it's fantastic effects work. And it turns out that Randall himself is a little bit broken. He's got the PTSD and the war fatigue or the shell shock, whatever you want to call it. He's lost his humanity and he's all gone a little bit loopy after years of fighting up Scottish guerrillas and up in the Highland Hills. And Claire, of course, kind of wants to help. And it seems for a second that maybe she could actually get him to be a bit redeemed. But then, boom! He gut punches her and it all starts to go horribly wrong, all until Dougal suddenly sweeps in and rescues her. And of course, they have to let him go instead of provoking an all-out war between the Scots and the English Redcoats. But they say that Claire has to return the next day, or both her and Dougal will be considered criminals. So they leg it, and after a wee visit to a magical truth river, no, really, seriously, a magical truth river, Claire ends up getting told that she only has one choice, one way to get out of this. She has to marry a Scotsman, or Dougal will be forced to hand her over the next day. But who could she marry? Who would it be? Really, I wonder. I'm sure you're wondering as well. No, you're not. It's Jamie. We knew it was going to be Jamie. And that's where the story ends, heading off to have an unexpected sudden wedding. So what did I think of this week's episode? I thought it was quite good. I really enjoyed the way that they did it. I really enjoyed the fact that you got to see the Redcoats as more than just the usual background people to get shot at or murdered, or Black Jack Randall. I thought Tobias Menzies was great. I mean, him and Katrina Balfe really held that whole episode together. Considering that a great portion of the episode was just the two of them sitting in a room talking. I thought the work with the flashback with Jamie's back was absolutely brilliant. The prosthetics there were amazing. And the way it was shot, it looked horrifying and beautiful at the same time and all kind of creepy and weird. A bit like last week, this was an episode that really relied on Katrina Balfe's acting, and I think that she did a fine job. Claire's character really is coming across, although there's a little bit of a disconnect here. The fact that she would so quickly throw her lot in with these English redcoat types did seem a little bit strange, especially since we never really got a chance to hear her story or her side of things, which seemed like a little bit of an oversight. But overall, it was an interesting way to do things, and I quite enjoyed it on the whole. But this is a week where I did have a few problems. Now let's start off at the beginning. Now, the Redcoats themselves, well, let's face it, they were kind of stereotyped. They were a little bit English tough and a little bit daft. I mean, it's not a terribly bad thing, but they felt like there could have been a little bit more work there to try and maybe differentiate a couple of them as different characters. The sort of Tim Nice but dim commanding officer, he was only there so Black Jack could come in and sit and have a little bit of an orgy with him, and so that he could say some stupid things about Dougal and we could think, oh, what an idiot. Well, that's one thing. As well as that, while this was an interrogation type episode for a big chunk of it, the episodes flew by so quickly. I mean, you got the sense they were talking in the room, but it didn't really feel like they'd said much, and then immediately it was over. I mean, even though there was quite a lot of dialogue. Now, that comes down just to the way that people interact and the way that the writing kind of, you could say, carries you away, and the flashback scene and all the intro and build up to that. But as I said earlier, there have been shows which have done interrogation and one-on-one kind of scenes. I mean, the classic ones are the Chain of Command two-parter on Star Trek Next Generation, which, sorry, bit of a nerd, but there we go. That's a really, really good episode. Similarly, you've got Babylon 5, Intersections in Real Time, which is probably one of the best two-person episodes of any TV show ever made. I mean, granted, it's got a couple of extra characters who pop in and have maybe one line. But for the vast majority of it, that's 45 minutes of two people in a room just sitting talking to each other. You could put that on as a stage play. Somebody should. It's absolutely fantastic. The other thing is the episode just sort of stops. It doesn't really come to a natural conclusion. It just sort of meanders along, and then eventually we just hit a point and then boom, credits come up. Now, yeah, I know they're leading into the next episode, but I felt there should have been a little more at the end. There wasn't really a pinning at the end to really say that, well, that's that done with. Claire's now going to have to marry Jamie, and we're not really sure how she feels about that. Because we basically just went straight from, oh, horrible brutality, shock, and her crying, to drink from this magic sulphury river, and then you're going to marry Jamie. And she just sits there and looks at the document and then mumbles something about, but I'm not a virgin to him. And he makes a little quip, which, of course, anyone who's read the book will know because it's one of the most famous lines. But at that point, I really felt something was missing here, and it needed a little bit more to close it, more than her just snatching a bottle of whiskey out of Dougal's hands and walking away. I mean, I'm sure next week's episode will manage to tie all this together, but it felt a little bit limp, and that's a shame, because overall, let's say it was a really good episode, but the fact that it started off as the second half of a weak cliffhanger, and ends just sort of disappearing off, didn't really do it for me. Didn't do it for me a lot, and that's a real shame. Still, I'm enjoying the show, and I'm curious to see where it goes. But for now, I've been Ian, and these have been my grumpy opinions.